The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the polished marble floor of Montgomery Manor. Outside, winter snow blanketed the estate grounds, but inside warmth radiated from gilded sconces along wood-paneled walls. Dozens of New York's elite mingled beneath vaulted ceilings, their expensive perfumes and colognes mingling in the air as waiters with silver trays navigated the crowd. In the center of the grand hall, 6-year-old Emma Montgomery slowly pushed her small, silver wheelchair forward. Her golden brown hair fell in soft waves around a delicate face dominated by striking blue eyes that seemed too knowing for her age. Her pale yellow dress contrasted sharply with the severe metal of her wheelchair as her small fingers gripped the wheels with practiced precision. Emma paused, watching the adults around her laugh and toast with champagne flutes. Her eyes sought out one figure in particular, but couldn't find him in the sea of black ties and evening gowns. She wheeled herself toward the buffet table, hoping for a glass of water. The crowd was dense, making navigation difficult. The right wheel of her chair caught on the long hem of a nearby guest's crimson gown. A tearing sound cut through the ambient conversation. A glass of red wine tipped, spilling across pristine white carpet and leaving a jarring crimson stain. The entire hall fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned at once toward the little girl. Emma froze, her small hands gripping the armrest tightly, her heart pounding beneath her ribs. Catherine Blackwood, the evening's hostess and Emma's stepmother, glided forward through the crowd. She was stunning in a fitted emerald gown that accentuated her hourglass figure, her auburn hair swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds gleaming at her throat and wrists. Catherine bent down, her voice honey-sweet but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Darling, you're being clumsy again." The words sounded tender, but her eyes blazed with barely contained fury, burning into Emma like twin lasers. I'm sorry," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to." Her tiny fingers gripped the chair so hard they turned white as she looked up at Catherine, silently begging for forgiveness, though she knew none would come. Catherine leaned closer, her lips nearly touching Emma's ear as she whispered words only the child could hear. "You little curse. Always humiliating me in front of everyone." Without another word, Catherine straightened, turned toward the banquet table, and lifted a steaming bowl of pumpkin soup. With a swift, deliberate motion that appeared almost accidental to most observers, she pivoted and upended the contents directly over Emma's head. The clatter of the silver spoons striking marble punctuated the shocked gasps that rippled through the crowd. Hot soup cascaded down Emma's golden brown hair, soaking the collar of her dress and running in rivulets over her small shoulders. The scalding liquid made her skin flush angry red. Tears sprang to her eyes as she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Montgomery spoils his new wife. Who would dare interfere?" Elizabeth Blackwood, Catherine's younger sister, laughed loudly from across the room. Her purple gown rustled as she pointed directly at Emma. "My God, this girl really is the curse of the Montgomery family." Michael Palmer, Elizabeth's husband, adjusted his blue silk tie and added with a smirk, "Looks like this family's about to face misfortune, keeping a crippled girl under their roof." The sound of mocking laughter mixed with Emma's quiet sniffling. She tried to wipe away the soup streaming down her face with trembling hands, but it only smeared further. Catherine stood tall, her alluring smile intact, as if what she had just done was nothing more than necessary discipline. Her eyes swept across the room, noting with satisfaction that no guest was brave enough to object. Emma bowed her head, her drenched hair plastered against her cheeks, tears dripping steadily. She whispered in a broken voice, just loud enough for those nearest to hear, "Please don't hate me anymore. I'll be good." At that moment, the massive oak doors at the entrance to the grand hall slammed open. The sound echoed across the space, commanding immediate attention. Every head turned toward the newcomer. Richard Montgomery stood in the doorway, an imposing figure at 52. His 6-foot frame filled the entrance, shoulders broad beneath a tailored charcoal suit. Silver threaded through dark hair at his temples, accentuating sharp features in penetrating gray eyes. In his hands, he held a small gift box wrapped in silver paper. Time seemed to stop as Richard took in the scene before him. His eyes locked first on the gathered crowd, then on Catherine's perfect smile. Before finally settling on his daughter, Emma sat shaking in her wheelchair, drenched in orange pumpkin soup, tears streaming down her flushed face. The gift box trembled in Richard's grasp. His face transformed from surprise to disbelief to cold fury in the span of seconds. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as he strode forward, his footsteps echoing sharply against the marble floor. "What is this, Catherine?" His voice emerged hoarse, choked with barely contained rage. "What have you done?" The atmosphere stretched taut like a violin string about to snap. A few guests cleared their throats nervously. Others quietly set their glasses down on nearby tables. Everyone watched, yet no one dared intervene in what was clearly a family matter. Catherine's composure faltered for only a heartbeat before she recovered. As if long practiced at facing sudden exposure, she quickly placed a manicured hand on her chest, her eyes glistening with theatrical tears. "Richard, I only wanted to teach her a lesson." Catherine's voice trembled with manufactured emotion. "The girl was disrespectful in front of our guests. I was humiliated. I never meant to hurt her." Emma continued sobbing quietly, unable to look up. When she finally found the courage to lift her head, her lashes were heavy with tears, voice breaking as she spoke. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't want Mom to be angry." Those simple words struck Richard like physical blows. He looked into his daughter's devastated eyes and, for the first time in years, recognized the unbridgeable distance that had grown between them. Part of that distance came from grief after losing Sarah, Emma's mother. Part came from his own neglect, allowing that chasm to widen while he buried himself in work. Richard drew a long, steadying breath. When he spoke, his voice was low and sharp enough to cut through the tense silence. "Enough. Do you think I would believe that?" His words echoed across the hall, striking the ears of everyone present. Guests began murmuring uncomfortably. Some shifted toward the exit, hurrying to avoid being caught in the unfolding scandal. The evening's glamorous celebration had collapsed into a humiliating spectacle. Elizabeth stepped forward to intervene, smoothing her purple dress with practiced grace. She smiled sweetly at Richard, though calculation gleamed beneath her polished exterior. "Richard, my sister only wanted what was best for the child," Elizabeth said smoothly, her voice flowing like honey laced with arsenic. "Don't let a moment of anger ruin your marriage." The glance she threw at Emma carried pure contempt, betraying her true feelings toward the child. Michael quickly joined in, his voice carrying a mocking tone. "Maybe you should discipline the girl yourself," he suggested with a smirk. "She ruined the party, not Catherine. Everyone saw it." Richard turned towards them, his eyes sharp as blades. Without a word, he moved to Emma's side, wrapping strong arms around her small shoulders and pulling her close to his chest. In that embrace, Emma felt so fragile that it pierced his heart. He lifted his gaze to Catherine, his voice like gravel as he ground out each word with deliberate force. "From this day on, you no longer have the right to touch her." The statement silenced the entire hall. Conversations ceased instantly. Catherine stood frozen, lips pressed into a thin line, face momentarily drained of color. Seconds later, she lowered her head and brushed away tears with a tissue, her hand trembling theatrically. Yet at the corner of her mouth, almost imperceptible, a cold curve appeared as she whispered something only Elizabeth could hear. "You will pay for this." Emma lifted her head again, her blue eyes meeting Catherine's. In that moment, the little girl understood with terrifying clarity that her nightmare was far from over. Richard moved quickly down the long hallway, leaving the party behind. The gift he'd brought for Catherine remained forgotten on a side table, now nothing more than a meaningless object. The bedroom door creaked softly as he opened it, gently lifting Emma from the wheelchair onto her bed and wrapping her in a soft quilt. Emma trembled as soup continued dripping from her hair. Richard soaked a towel in warm water from the adjoining bathroom and returned, carefully beginning to clean her hair. His hand shook when he discovered angry red splotches on her scalp where the soup had burned her delicate skin. "Daddy will be gentle, Emma," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his breathing grew heavy with suppressed emotion. "Don't be afraid." Emma pressed her lips together, too scared to cry out when the towel touched particularly sensitive areas. She winced and whispered softly, "Daddy, don't be mad at Mom. If you leave her, she'll hate me even more." Richard froze, his hand tightening around the damp towel. He sat down on the edge of the bed, reaching to hold her tiny hand in his much larger one. His voice broke as he spoke. "No, Emma, none of this is your fault. It's me. I'm the one to blame. I left you alone for too long. I let you suffer on your own." Tears fell from his eyes for the first time in many years. Emma blinked in surprise, seeing those tears, and let out a small sigh that seemed almost like relief. She shifted closer, resting her head against his chest. "All I want is for you to be here with me," she whispered, voice heavy with exhaustion. Richard held his daughter tightly, feeling as though his chest might shatter into pieces. He knew this terrible night was only the beginning of what would surely become a brutal battle. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt truly present, truly aware of what mattered most. Meanwhile, on the lowest floor of the mansion, another door slammed shut. In a private room decorated with expensive imported liquor, Catherine stood before a vanity mirror, reapplying her deep red lipstick. Her eyes burned with undiminished rage. She lifted a crystal glass of wine and hurled it against the wall, the sound of shattering glass echoing sharply through the room. "Richard dares to choose her, a crippled child, instead of me." Catherine's voice emerged as a harsh growl, her eyes cold and calculating. "I'll make him see what hell truly looks like." Elizabeth lounged on a nearby armchair, legs crossed elegantly at the ankle. She was a striking woman with the same auburn hair as her sister, though she lacked Catherine's perfect features. Behind her practiced smile lurked malice that matched her sister's. "Don't worry, Catherine," Elizabeth said, tilting her head thoughtfully. "I have connections. The press won't let him get away with this. I know a tabloid reporter who owes me a favor, and with one sensational headline, Richard's reputation will be dragged through the mud." Michael stood by the window, lighting an expensive cigar and exhaling a contemptuous stream of smoke. He thinks he's untouchable because of his money and name, but the press always craves dramatic stories. A millionaire abandoning his wife, mistreating his child. Scandals like that are a feast for the media. Catherine clenched her hand, manicured nails digging into her palm hard enough to leave crescent marks. She took a deep breath, composing herself, then curved her lips into a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Then start preparing," she commanded. "I will not lose to a crippled child." In the quiet bedroom upstairs, Emma finally drifted into exhausted sleep. Richard sat beside the bed, holding his daughter's hand until her breathing steadied. When he was certain she wouldn't wake, he stood and walked to the antique desk near the window. From the drawer, he removed an old leather notebook. The handwriting inside belonged to Sarah, his first wife and Emma's mother, the woman who had sacrificed her life to save their daughter during that tragic shipwreck 2 years ago. He caressed the pages gently, a wave of aching regret washing over him. "Sarah," he whispered, as if speaking directly to his lost wife. "I let our daughter suffer for too long. I promise from now on, no one will ever be allowed to hurt her again." Night had settled fully over the estate. A cold winter breeze drifted through the slightly open balcony door, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine from the conservatory. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, but her dreams were far from peaceful. In the darkness beyond the doorway, Catherine's voice filtered through, cold as a knife blade, hissing just loudly enough to penetrate the child's subconscious. "Cripple. Soon you'll drag your father into the abyss with you." Emma jolted awake, sweat beading on her forehead despite the winter chill. Her wide eyes darted around the shadowed room, finding no one. Yet the whispered threat seemed to linger in the air. Her small hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the blanket. In the darkness, Emma hugged her pillow tightly, heart pounding wildly. For the first time in her young life, she understood with terrifying clarity that her nightmares no longer belonged only to her dreams. They had taken physical form in her waking world. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, illuminating the breakfast room where Richard sat alone at the long table. A freshly delivered newspaper lay open before him, the bold headline running across the front page impossible to ignore. "Montgomery turns his back. Millionaire abandons wife who devoted herself to caring for disabled daughter." Richard's face drained of color. His hand clenched into a fist, then slammed down onto the wooden table with enough force to rattle the silverware. The sound reverberated through the room, making the already tense atmosphere nearly unbearable. "Catherine's dirty trick," he growled through clenched teeth. She wasted no time. From the doorway, Emma watched silently, having wheeled herself down from her room early to ask her father something important. Seeing his anger, she pressed herself against the wall, eyes welling with fresh tears. After gathering her courage, she spoke softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Dad, is it because of me that they hate you now? Richard froze at those words. He lifted his head, meeting those worried blue eyes that so resembled Sarah's. Immediately, he crossed the room, knelt down in front of the wheelchair, and placed both hands on his daughter's shoulders. His voice dropped lower, but carried firm resolve. No, Emma, you are the reason I must stand tall. I will never let anyone use you to destroy me again. Emma bit her lip as tears streamed down her cheeks. In her heart, a faint light of hope flickered to life where before there had been only fear and resignation. She nodded gently, then leaned against her father, feeling for the first time that his arms were the safest place in her world. Across town, in a discreet cafe nestled in the heart of Manhattan, Catherine sat with Elizabeth and Michael at a corner table. Two new faces joined their conspiratorial gathering. James Wilson was a veteran tabloid journalist who had splashed countless sensational stories about wealthy families across front pages. He dressed casually in a worn blazer, but his shrewd gaze and calculating smile suggested he could already smell profit in this situation. Beside him sat Amanda Collins, a young but notoriously cunning attorney known for handling scandalous cases and finding legal loopholes. Her features were sharp, her smile cold, her eyes constantly assessing potential advantages. James lifted his coffee cup and took a sip before chuckling softly. The public loves this kind of storyline, he explained with practiced ease. A wealthy husband abandoning a devoted wife and a disabled daughter. Perfect headline material. Montgomery will look like a heartless villain, while Mrs. Blackwood, he paused, glancing at Catherine with a loaded look, will become the betrayed wife, a sympathetic victim. The press always needs someone like that. Elizabeth laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Richard is so naive. He has no idea the media is more dangerous than politics itself, Amanda interjected, her tone professional and firm. My part is to handle the legal angle. If necessary, I'll help create a narrative around Emma's care. All I need to do is emphasize that Emma is disabled and vulnerable. People will naturally believe Richard neglected his daughter. That alone is enough to sway public opinion and potentially any judge. Catherine leaned back in her chair, a faint smile curving her lips. She inhaled deeply, then murmured, as if making a solemn promise. He chose her over me. Fine. Let's see how long he can hold on to his precious empire once I'm finished. Michael waved a hand dismissively. Relax. All of New York will turn against Montgomery soon enough. An empire built over generations can collapse from a single well-placed article. Back at Montgomery Manor, Richard sat in his study with Emma beside him. The anger burning inside him had not subsided, but he knew he could not act rashly. He needed evidence, a strategy, a way to protect both his daughter and the Montgomery name. The door opened softly as Rebecca Morgan, his longtime assistant, entered. At 45, Rebecca carried herself with dignified efficiency, her face stern, yet her eyes reflecting unwavering loyalty. She had worked for the Montgomerys since before Emma was born, staying through Sarah's death and Richard's subsequent marriage to Catherine. Rebecca placed a thick manila folder on the desk, her voice low and determined. Sir, I've been watching her for a long time. This is what can save both you and Emma. Richard looked up, his eyes questioning. What did you find? Rebecca did not answer immediately. Instead, she pushed the folder toward him, then spoke with quiet intensity. Inside are names you would never expect. If you decide to open it, everything will change. There will be no going back. Richard stared at the unmarked folder, his heart pounding against his ribs. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out to open it. The very first page caused Richard's vision to blur momentarily. The name at the top read, David Montgomery. His hand froze above the paper. David, Sarah's brother, a man Richard had rarely seen since the funeral. Family distance had kept them apart, but Richard had never imagined David would appear in this file. Rebecca lowered her voice further. You should meet with him. David has witnessed more than you think. Richard did not hesitate. That afternoon, in the quiet sanctuary of his private study, David Montgomery walked in. He was a tall, thin man in his mid-40s with a weathered face. Time had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, and his shoulders carried the weight of unspoken burdens. The family resemblance to Sarah was unmistakable, particularly in his eyes, the same striking blue that Emma had inherited. David sat across from Richard, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I stayed silent because I thought you would protect Emma," he began, his voice hoarse from emotion. "But today when I saw that article, I couldn't bear it anymore. Richard, it's time for you to truly protect your daughter." Richard said nothing, waiting for David to continue. "I visited many times over the past year," David went on, his voice breaking with each word. "I saw Catherine push Emma's wheelchair into the corner when she thought no one was looking. I heard her humiliate the child, calling her a burden, a motherless brat, a curse that brings misfortune. Every time, Emma just endured it quietly. She never dared to tell you." Richard lowered his head, each of David's words piercing him like physical blows. "Where was I when all of this happened?" he murmured, the question directed more at himself than at David. From her hiding place at the top of the staircase, Emma watched through the banister rails, catching fragments of the conversation. Her small eyes filled with tears, but this time she did not cry aloud. Instead, she bit her lip until she tasted blood, her hand gripping the armrest of her wheelchair as she struggled to contain her emotions. The next day, Richard visited Emma's elementary school. In a brightly colored classroom with children's artwork adorning the walls, he met with Rachel Turner, Emma's art teacher. Rachel was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put children at ease. On her desk lay a stack of drawings Emma had created in class. Rachel carefully handed them to Richard one by one. The first showed a locked house with bars on the windows. Another depicted a tiny girl standing behind prison-like bars, darkness covering everything around her. A third drawing showed a child in a wheelchair with a dark, looming shadow hovering behind her. Rachel looked directly at Richard, her voice steady and deliberate. "Do you realize that in all of these drawings, Emma has never once depicted her stepmother?" With a smile. "Children express their fears through art when they cannot verbalize them." Richard stared at the crayon drawings, his hand trembling as he touched the paper. He lifted his eyes to meet Rachel's, his voice breaking with emotion. "What kind of father have I been to let my daughter live in hell inside her own home?" Rachel placed her hand gently on the table, her tone soft but resolute. "You still have a chance to make things right, Mr. Montgomery. But if you wait even one more day, Emma will stop believing in anyone, including you." By late afternoon, Rebecca returned with another witness. Henry Williams was an elderly man who had lived for years in the same Upper East Side neighborhood as the Montgomerys. His hands shook slightly with age as he clutched a small USB drive, his face tense with resolve. "I've held on to this for months," Henry explained, his voice unsteady but determined. "I thought no one would believe an old man like me, but now, seeing everything explode in the papers, I can't stay silent anymore." Richard connected the USB to his laptop. On the screen appeared Catherine's face, twisted with unmistakable anger. In the video, she shoved Emma's wheelchair violently down the front steps of the house. Emma's scream echoed through the speakers. Then the footage showed the little girl tumbling onto the brick pavers below, her hands desperately clawing for support. Richard stood paralyzed, his fists clenching until his knuckles turned white, face contorted with pain and fury. Across the room, Emma caught sight of the video from the doorway where she had quietly wheeled herself. She burst into heart-wrenching sobs, burying her face against Rebecca's side. The air in the room grew heavy with shared anguish. Henry placed the USB drive firmly on the table, his voice strengthening with conviction. "Mr. Montgomery, you have to use this. That little girl can't take any more." That night, the lights of a major newspaper's editorial office burned late. Rebecca walked in with purpose, placed the USB drive on the editor's desk, and met his eyes with unwavering determination. "It's time for the mask to come off," she stated simply. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Catherine picked up her phone and dialed James Wilson directly, her voice cold as winter steel. "I'll teach him how to lose everything in a single day." The following morning dawned clear and cold. The Manhattan courthouse stood imposing against the winter sky, its stone steps already crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. Inside the main courtroom, every seat was filled, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. On one side of the aisle, Catherine entered wearing a demure navy dress, her hair styled to perfection, eyes sparkling with calculated vulnerability. She took her seat at the defendant's table, with Elizabeth and Michael beside her, their expressions radiating confident superiority. Elizabeth leaned toward Michael, whispering with a smirk, "The circus is about to begin." Michael nodded, casting a quick glance at the reporters furiously typing on laptops. "The media is eating this up. As soon as Catherine sheds a few tears, the public will believe her completely." Across the aisle, Richard sat upright in a tailored charcoal suit, his face composed but tension evident in the set of his jaw. Beside him sat Michael Stern, a respected attorney known for his integrity and reluctance to represent wealthy clients without just cause. Richard turned to look behind him. Emma sat in her wheelchair among the spectators, wearing a pale yellow dress that matched the one from the party. Her small hands gripped the wheel rims tightly, her blue eyes reflecting both anxiety and newfound determination. When she caught her father's gaze, Emma pressed her lips together and gave a small, brave nod. Judge Margaret Collins entered, her silver hair framing a face that had seen decades of human conflict in her courtroom. She struck her gavel with authority. "The court is now in session. Mr. Montgomery, do you have anything to say about the charges brought against you?" Richard rose to his feet, the sound of shifting chairs rippling across the room. He drew a deep breath, his voice strong and unwavering as he answered, "My daughter has been abused by this woman, and I have witnesses who will confirm it." The room buzzed with murmurs and whispers. Catherine immediately began to tremble, pressing a tissue to her eyes as she clutched her chest theatrically. "He is lying, Your Honor," she cried with practiced distress. "I raised that child as my own. I was there for her while he buried himself in work. I only tried to teach her respect and manners." Stern nodded subtly toward David, who stood and approached the witness stand. His eyes were red-rimmed with emotion as he faced the crowded courtroom. "I am the brother of Sarah Montgomery, the woman who gave her life to save Emma during the shipwreck 2 years ago," David began, his voice heavy with conviction. "I have seen Catherine slap Emma and push her wheelchair into walls. That is not discipline. That is abuse. I will not allow anyone to hurt my niece any longer." The courtroom fell silent. Catherine's face hardened momentarily before she recovered her victim persona. "He is slandering me," she insisted sharply. "He was never inside my house. These are all lies to protect Richard." Stern did not allow her time to elaborate further. He motioned forward, and Rachel Turner approached the stand carrying the folder of Emma's drawings. She laid the pictures out for the judge to examine. "These are what Emma drew in my class," Rachel explained, her voice gentle yet firm. "A house locked shut, a shadow looming over a small girl. In every drawing, not once did she depict her stepmother with kindness or warmth. Your Honor, this is the heart of a child trapped in fear." Richard watched each drawing being presented, his heart constricting painfully. He whispered just loud enough for Stern to hear, "I have been such a terrible father, letting my daughter live in hell inside her own home." Catherine burst into fresh tears, her shoulders shaking with sobs that appeared genuine to anyone who didn't know better. "That's just a child's imagination," she choked out between carefully timed sobs. "I love her. I raised her when her own father was too busy. She makes up stories to tear her parents apart. You don't understand how difficult it is to raise a disabled child." Judge Collins struck her gavel firmly, demanding order in her courtroom. She leaned forward, looking directly at Stern. "Call your next witness." A murmur spread through the courtroom when Emma slowly wheeled herself toward the stand. The little girl trembled visibly, her hands gripping the wheels with white-knuckled intensity, her breath coming in short, nervous bursts. But when she faced the judge, she lifted her eyes, her voice small but clear, every word landing with the weight of truth. "She called me a curse," Emma said simply. "I just wanted my stepmother to love me." A wave of silence swept across the courtroom. The reporters stopped typing. The audience stared without blinking. Catherine's face turned pale, her eyes flashing with panic. Elizabeth quickly grabbed her sister's hand and whispered urgently, "Stay calm. Don't let it show." Judge Collins looked at Richard, then said sternly, "Bring out the photographic evidence immediately." Stern nodded. Rebecca rose from the public seats, walked forward, and held the small USB drive in her hand. She placed it into the court officer's palm. The drive was plugged into the large screen mounted on the wall. A faint screeching sound echoed through the speakers as the technician navigated to the video file. The courtroom held its collective breath as the play button was pressed. Richard returned home that evening with Emma, both physically and emotionally exhausted from the day's proceedings. The judge had ordered a recess until the following morning, when the video evidence would be presented in full. As he tucked Emma into bed, he noticed her eyes darting nervously toward the shadows in the corners of the room. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Emma clutched her blanket tighter. "What if she comes back tonight?" Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his hand covering his daughter's much smaller one. "She won't, I promise you. There's a security guard outside your door tonight. No one will hurt you ever again." The following morning, the headline of the Montgomery Daily splashed across newsstands throughout the city: "Shocking abuse allegations against Catherine Blackwood Montgomery." Beneath it, a still image from Henry's video showed Catherine's rage-contorted face as she pushed Emma's wheelchair. Richard sat at his desk, the newspaper spread before him. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. The phone rang incessantly, journalists clamoring for comments. Rebecca fielded the calls with practiced efficiency, allowing only the most urgent business matters to reach him. "The board members are requesting an emergency meeting," Rebecca said, entering his office with a stack of messages. "They're concerned about stock prices dropping after this morning's headlines." Richard nodded wearily. "Schedule it for tomorrow. Today I need to prepare for court." Outside Montgomery Tower, Catherine emerged from a black town car, dressed impeccably in a cream-colored suit. A crowd of reporters surged forward, microphones thrust toward her face. She dabbed carefully at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, her expression perfectly calibrated to project wounded innocence. "I've only ever wanted what was best for Emma," she told the cameras, her voice catching with apparent emotion. "Richard works constantly. I was the one who took care of her daily needs. These allegations are fabricated by a powerful man who wants to discard his wife without honoring their prenuptial agreement." James Wilson stood at the edge of the press gathering, nodding approvingly at Catherine's performance. He scribbled notes for his next article, already framing the narrative: "The vulnerable wife versus the cold calculating billionaire." At Westside Elementary, Rachel Turner sat at her desk during lunch break, reviewing Emma's latest drawing. Unlike the dark, confined spaces of her previous artwork, this one showed the faintest glimmer of hope: a small window with yellow light streaming through black bars. Rachel carefully placed the drawing in a folder marked "Evidence." Before closing it, she paused to add a note: "First sign of healing. Light source introduced." Richard entered the prestigious offices of Stern Legal Group overlooking Central Park. The reception area bustled with activity, young associates rushing between conference rooms with stacks of documents. Michael Stern emerged from his corner office, his gray suit as precisely tailored as his reputation. "We have 72 hours before the custody hearing," Stern said without preamble, leading Richard into a private conference room. "Judge Collins is known for her thoroughness. The video evidence is compelling, but Catherine's legal team will claim it's been taken out of context or tampered with. We need more." Richard nodded grimly. "What about the prenuptial agreement?" Rebecca discovered that Catherine may have altered it. Stern's eyebrows rose. "That would constitute fraud. Do you have proof?" "Not yet," Richard admitted, "but I have a lead. Catherine's former secretary, Jessica Bennett. She was fired 6 months ago under suspicious circumstances." Across town in a modest apartment in Queens, Jessica Bennett stared at her phone, her finger hovering over Richard Montgomery's number. At 32, Jessica had the sharp intelligence of someone who had worked her way up from nothing. Her small living room was meticulously organized, resumes spread across the coffee table as she hunted for a new position. The phone rang in her hand, startling her. An unknown number. Jessica hesitated before answering. "Miss Bennett? This is Amanda Collins, representing Catherine Montgomery." Jessica's blood ran cold. "I have nothing to say to Mrs. Montgomery or her representatives." "Perhaps this will change your mind." Amanda's voice turned silky. "We know about the documents you copied before leaving. Return them, sign an NDA, and $50,000 will be deposited into your account by morning. Refuse and a plagiarism lawsuit from your college days might resurface. Jessica's hand tightened around the phone. That was dismissed. The professor admitted he made a mistake. Records can be altered, Amanda replied smoothly. Think carefully about your future, Miss Bennett. The line went dead. Jessica sank onto her couch, staring at the manila envelope hidden behind her bookshelf. Inside lay the original prenuptial agreement and the altered version Catherine had substituted, along with emails outlining the scheme. Her doorbell rang, causing her to jump. Through the peephole, she saw Richard Montgomery standing in the hallway. At Montgomery Manor, Emma sat in her therapy session with Dr. Maya Lewis, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. The comfortable office was filled with toys, art supplies, and soft cushions designed to create a safe environment. Can you show me how you feel today? Dr. Lewis asked gently, placing a set of emotion cards on the table between them. Emma studied the cartoon faces before selecting one showing fear. This one. What makes you feel afraid, Emma? The little girl's fingers traced the wheels of her chair. She said she's going to hurt my dad, too. Catherine said that to you? Emma nodded slowly. She whispers things when Dad isn't listening. She says I'm going to drag him into the abyss with me. Dr. Lewis made a careful note, keeping her expression neutral despite her inner concern. Emma, you are very brave to tell me this. You know that these things Catherine says are not true, right? I don't know, Emma whispered. Bad things happen to people around me. Mom died saving me. Now Dad is in trouble because of me. Your mother made a choice because she loved you very much, Dr. Lewis explained gently. And your father is standing up for you because he loves you too. None of this is your fault, Emma. Emma picked up a crayon and began drawing on the paper provided. Slowly a figure emerged, a tall man standing protectively beside a small girl in a wheelchair. Above them, a single star shone in an otherwise dark sky. This is me and Dad, Emma explained, and that's Mom watching over us. In a luxurious penthouse across town, Catherine paced the marble floors, her heels clicking rhythmically as Elizabeth and Michael watched from the sofa. Amanda Collins spread documents across the glass coffee table. The custody hearing is in 3 days, Amanda stated. The video evidence is damaging, but we can claim it shows an isolated incident taken out of context. What concerns me more is this Jessica Bennett. If she has documentation of the prenuptial alterations, we have a serious problem. Well, Catherine paused, her pacing, eyes narrowing. She was supposed to be handled. Threatening her was a mistake, Amanda replied coolly. She hasn't accepted our offer. Worse, my sources tell me Richard Montgomery visited her apartment this afternoon. Catherine's face transformed, the careful mask of vulnerability replaced by cold fury. She grabbed a crystal vase from the side table and hurled it against the wall. Water and flowers cascaded to the floor as shards of crystal scattered across Italian marble. Find something on her, Catherine hissed. Everyone has secrets. Dig deeper. Elizabeth watched her sister with calculating eyes. Perhaps we need additional insurance. Something more permanent. Michael shifted uncomfortably. What exactly are you suggesting? Nothing so crude as what you're imagining, Elizabeth replied smoothly. But accidents happen, especially to disabled children. Perhaps Emma might have a medical emergency while in Catherine's care during a supervised visit. Catherine's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. Amanda, request an emergency visitation order. Claim I'm devastated by separation from my beloved stepdaughter. That's risky, Amanda cautioned. The judge might deny it given the evidence. Then find a judge who won't, Catherine snapped. That's what I pay you for. Meanwhile, Richard sat in Jessica Bennett's small living room, examining the documents she had bravely preserved. The original agreement stated that in case of divorce, Catherine would receive a one-time settlement of $5 million, Jessica explained, pointing to the relevant clause. But this version, which appeared after I was instructed to shred the original, grants her 60% of your assets and primary custody of Emma. Richard's face darkened as he compared the signatures. This isn't my handwriting. No, Jessica agreed quietly. It's a forgery. I noticed the difference immediately, which is why I kept copies of both versions. 3 days after I questioned Catherine about it, I was fired for performance issues. Richard looked up at the young woman. Why are you helping me now? You must know it's dangerous. Jessica's eyes hardened with resolve. Because I heard how she spoke to Emma when no one was around. Because I saw bruises on that little girl's arms. I stayed silent too long out of fear. I won't make that mistake again. Back at Montgomery Manor, Rebecca coordinated security upgrades with a team of professionals. New cameras, reinforced locks, and additional personnel were being installed throughout the property. The panic button system connects directly to the security office and police, the lead technician explained. We're installing one in every room, including Miss Emma's bedroom and bathroom. Rebecca nodded approvingly. And the monitoring software? Active and running, all incoming and outgoing communications from the property are now being recorded and archived. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Richard. Jessica agreed to testify, coming home with documents. Alert security. As darkness fell over the city, Elizabeth met privately with Paul Stevens in a dimly lit bar far from her usual upscale haunts. At 48, Paul carried himself with the confidence of someone comfortable but operating outside the law. His police career had ended in disgrace 5 years earlier after evidence went missing in several high-profile cases. The job pays $50,000, Elizabeth explained, sliding an envelope across the table. Half now, half when it's done. We need information and we need certain evidence to disappear. Paul pocketed the envelope without counting it. Breaking and entering into a Montgomery property won't be easy. The security is top-notch. That's why we're paying premium rates, Elizabeth replied coolly. There will be a window of opportunity tomorrow between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. Most of the household will be at court for the preliminary hearing. Paul took a slow sip of his whiskey. And if I encounter resistance? Elizabeth's smile was cold. Oishimama, use your judgment, but remember, we need this to look like a routine burglary. Nothing traceable. At Montgomery Manor, Richard sat with Emma on her bedroom floor, a chessboard between them. The little girl studied the pieces intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. Knight to e5, she declared finally, moving the piece with delicate precision. Richard raised an eyebrow, impressed. That was a good move. Where did you learn that strategy? Mom taught me, Emma replied, a small smile touching her lips. She said chess is like life. You have to think several moves ahead. Richard felt a pang in his chest at the mention of Sarah. She was right as usual. Your mother was always the wisest person I knew. Emma looked up at him, her blue eyes serious. Dad, what will happen at court tomorrow? Richard considered his answer carefully. The judge will look at the evidence and listen to what everyone has to say. Then she'll decide what happens next. Will I have to live with Catherine again? The raw fear in her voice made Richard's heart clench. No, Emma. Maybe again, I promise you that. Emma nodded, then moved another chess piece. Checkmate, she said quietly. Richard stared at the board in surprise, then laughed genuinely for the first time in weeks. Your mother would be very proud. The next morning dawned cold and clear. The courthouse steps were again crowded with reporters and spectators drawn by the salacious headlines. Inside, the tension was palpable as Catherine entered, today dressed in subdued gray with a single strand of pearls, the picture of dignified suffering. She approached Richard before taking her seat, leaning close enough that only he could hear her words. I've requested an emergency visitation with Emma this evening. If you know what's good for you, you won't fight it. Richard's expression remained impassive, but his eyes hardened. Threaten my daughter again, and whatever remains of your reputation will be the least of your concerns. Judge Collins called the court to order. Today, we will review the video evidence submitted by the defense, as well as hear testimony from additional witnesses. The courtroom lights dimmed as the large screen flickered to life. The footage began with Emma slowly wheeling herself up the manor's wheelchair ramp. Catherine appeared behind her, checking her watch impatiently. When Emma struggled with the slight incline, Catherine glanced around quickly before giving the wheelchair a harsh push that sent it careening sideways off the ramp. Emma tumbled onto the stone pathway, a cry of pain escaping her as Catherine stood watching impassively. Only when the manor's front door opened did Catherine rush forward, arranging her features into a mask of concern as she helped Emma back into the chair. The footage continued, showing multiple instances of Catherine's abuse, pushing the wheelchair unnecessarily hard, accidentally spilling hot tea near Emma, leaving the child stranded at the top of stairs. Most damning was the sequence Henry had specifically preserved. Catherine deliberately pushing Emma's wheelchair down 3 stone steps at the garden entrance, then walking away as the child struggled on the ground. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. A woman in the back row stood up and left, unable to continue watching. Judge Collins's face remained professionally neutral, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her pen. When the lights came back on, Catherine was sobbing theatrically into her handkerchief. "These are isolated incidents, taken completely out of context," she cried. "Caring for a disabled child is challenging. I made mistakes, but I never meant to hurt her." Judge Collins turned to Richard. "Mr. Montgomery, do you have additional witnesses?" Richard nodded, and Rachel Turner was called to the stand. She presented Emma's drawings, explaining the psychological significance of each dark image. Next came Dr. Lewis, who carefully detailed Emma's anxiety symptoms and fear responses consistent with ongoing abuse. Finally, Jessica Bennett took the stand, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady, as she explained the altered prenuptial agreement in Catherine's systematic campaign to secure both Montgomery money and custody of Emma, despite privately expressing hatred for the child. She called Emma leverage when speaking to her sister, Jessica testified. She said, and I quote, "The crippled brat is our ticket to the Montgomery fortune." Catherine leapt to her feet. "She's lying. This disgruntled ex-employee has a vendetta against me." "Mrs. Montgomery, control yourself or you will be removed," Judge Collins warned sharply. "Ms. Bennett, do you have documentation to support your claims?" Jessica nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I have the original prenuptial agreement in the fraudulently altered version, as well as emails between Mrs. Montgomery and her sister discussing the scheme." As the documents were submitted into evidence, Catherine's confident facade began to crack. She whispered frantically to Amanda, who shook her head in warning, placing a restraining hand on Catherine's arm. Judge Collins reviewed the materials carefully before addressing the court. "Given the serious nature of these allegations and the compelling evidence presented, I am ordering a full investigation into the claims of document fraud. Until that investigation is complete and the custody hearing occurs, I am granting temporary sole custody of Emma Montgomery to her father, Richard Montgomery." The gavel struck with finality. Catherine's face contorted with rage before she quickly composed herself for the cameras. Elizabeth whispered something in her ear as they gathered their belongings. Michael glanced nervously between them, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Outside the courtroom, Richard spoke briefly with Stern, while Rebecca sheltered Emma from the press photographers. David stood nearby, his protective stance mirroring his late sister's determination. "We've won the first battle," Stern cautioned, "but Catherine's legal team will appeal. The custody hearing is still scheduled for Friday. We need to be prepared for more aggressive tactics." Richard nodded grimly. "We will be. Thank you, Michael." Across the courthouse lobby, Catherine huddled with Amanda, Elizabeth, and Michael. Her voice was low and venomous. "This changes nothing. Paul is already in position. By tonight, we'll have what we need." Amanda looked alarmed. "Catherine, whatever you're planning, stop now. Document fraud is one thing, but if you're involving Stevens in something illegal, then perhaps you should remove yourself from the situation." Catherine cut in coldly. "Plausible deniability and all that." Elizabeth smiled thinly. "Everything is under control. By this time tomorrow, Richard Montgomery will be begging for a settlement." At 3:15 that afternoon, the security cameras at Montgomery Manor briefly went dark. When they reactivated 7 minutes later, nothing appeared amiss. The guard at the gate logged no unusual activity. The alarm system remained armed throughout. Yet inside Richard's home office, a shadow moved with practiced efficiency. Paul Stevens wore black gloves as he systematically photographed documents, downloaded files from the computer, and planted nearly undetectable listening devices in light fixtures and behind picture frames. In Emma's bedroom, he paused, surveying the child's possessions with professional detachment. Following Elizabeth's instructions, he placed a small electronic device inside the control panel of the electric wheelchair, then carefully reassembled it, leaving no trace of tampering. Paul was checking the hallway before exit when he heard the front door open downstairs. Voices echoed through the foyer. Richard had returned home early with Emma. Silently cursing, Paul retreated to the attached bathroom, calculating his escape options. In the bedroom, Emma wheeled herself to her desk while Richard took a phone call in the doorway. "Yes, Rebecca, send the documents to Stern immediately," Richard said, watching as Emma began arranging her art supplies. Emma opened her drawer to retrieve colored pencils and found a folded note that hadn't been there that morning. Curious, she unfolded it. Written in block capitals, "You will never be safe." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She looked up, sensing something wrong. The bathroom door was nearly closed, but through the narrow opening, she glimpsed movement, a shadow where no shadow should be. "Dad," she called, her voice deliberately casual, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Can you help me reach my medicine on the high shelf?" Richard ended his call immediately, noting the strange tension in his daughter's voice. "Of course, sweetheart." He moved toward her, and Emma discreetly pointed toward the bathroom door. Richard's posture changed instantly, his body shifting to place himself between Emma and potential danger. With subtle gestures, he instructed Emma to move her wheelchair toward the bedroom door. Once she was safely in position, Richard approached the bathroom, his movements measured and controlled. The door burst open. Paul Stevens lunged forward, a blur of motion as he shoved Richard aside and sprinted for the hallway. Richard recovered quickly, giving chase as Paul raced down the corridor toward the servants' stairs. "Security breach! Intruder on the premises!" Richard shouted, triggering the Manor's alert system. Alarms blared throughout the building as Paul descended the stairs two at a time, Richard close behind. In the main foyer, David Montgomery had just arrived for dinner. Hearing the commotion, he positioned himself at the bottom of the stairwell, bracing for impact as Paul came barreling down. The collision sent both men sprawling across the marble floor. Paul recovered first, drawing a concealed weapon from his ankle holster. David lunged forward, grappling for control of the gun. They struggled violently, crashing into an antique side table that shattered beneath their weight. The gun discharged with a deafening crack. David cried out, clutching his shoulder as blood bloomed across his shirt. Paul scrambled to his feet, racing for the front door just as security personnel converged from multiple directions. Cornered, Paul turned back toward David, raising the weapon again. Richard charged down the final flight of stairs and tackled Paul from behind. The gun skittered across the floor as both men grappled fiercely. Paul fought with the desperate strength of someone facing serious prison time. His elbow connected with Richard's jaw, sending pain exploding through his skull. Richard responded with a powerful blow to Paul's midsection that drove the air from his lungs. Security personnel swarmed in, restraining Paul as Richard rushed to David's side. The wound was bleeding profusely but appeared to have missed any major arteries. "Get the first aid kit," Richard ordered a nearby staff member. "And call an ambulance." From the top of the stairs, Emma watched the scene unfold, her face pale with fear, yet somehow more resolute than ever before. When their eyes met, Richard saw something new in his daughter's gaze. Not just terror, but determination. Later that evening at Manhattan Memorial Hospital, Richard sat beside David's bed while Emma dozed in her wheelchair nearby. The bullet had been removed successfully, leaving David with a bandaged shoulder and a prescription for painkillers. "You could have been killed," Richard said quietly, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. David shook his head slightly. "Sarah would have done the same. That's what family does." Detective Maria Gonzalez entered the hospital room, her badge displayed on her belt. At 40, she carried herself with the confident authority of someone who had risen through the ranks through sheer competence. "Mr. Montgomery, we've completed our initial interrogation of the suspect, Paul Stevens," she reported. "He's a former police officer with a history of misconduct. He's refusing to name his employer, but we found $50,000 in cash in his possession, along with sophisticated surveillance equipment. He was planting bugs in my home," Richard explained, "and he left a threatening note for my daughter." Detective Gonzalez nodded grimly. "We're executing a search warrant on his residence tonight. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you do not return to Montgomery Manor until we've conducted a complete security sweep." "We'll stay at the penthouse," Richard decided. "It has its own security team. I've stationed officers outside this room and will arrange an escort for you and your daughter when you're ready to leave," the detective continued. "Montgomery, whoever hired Stevens is clearly desperate and dangerous. Until we identify them, you should consider yourself and your daughter at serious risk." After Detective Gonzalez departed, Richard's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He stepped into the hallway to answer it. Richard Montgomery. Hello, Richard. Catherine's voice was smooth as silk. I just heard about the unfortunate incident at the manor. How terrifying for poor Emma. Perhaps she would feel safer with her devoted stepmother. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. Whatever game you're playing, it's over, Catherine. Breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping. Your hired thug is facing serious charges. Catherine laughed softly. Hired thug? I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been at the spa all afternoon with Elizabeth. We have multiple witnesses. How unfortunate that your home was targeted by a random burglar. Perhaps your security isn't as impenetrable as you believed. Stay away from my daughter, Richard warned, his voice dropping dangerously low. Oh, I intend to see Emma very soon, Catherine replied. In fact, Judge Harris has just granted my emergency visitation request for tomorrow afternoon. Isn't that wonderful news? Richard froze. Judge Harris? Our case is before Judge Collins. Judge Collins had a family emergency, Catherine explained with mock sympathy. Judge Harris was kind enough to step in and review my petition. He found it quite compelling. See you tomorrow, Richard. Emma and I have so much catching up to do. The line went dead. Richard stood motionless in the hospital corridor, ice spreading through his veins. Judge Harris was notoriously corrupt, with rumors of connections to powerful financial interests. That Catherine had managed to get him assigned to their case suggested her influence extended further than Richard had imagined. He returned to the hospital room, finding Emma awake and watching him intently. What's wrong, Dad? She asked, immediately sensing his distress. Richard forced a reassuring smile. Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. How's your Uncle David doing? Emma wasn't fooled. It was her, wasn't it? Catherine called you. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Sarah had always believed in being honest with Emma, treating her with respect rather than false protection. Yes, she's trying to arrange a visitation with you tomorrow. Fear flashed across Emma's face before being replaced by remarkable composure for a 6-year-old. I don't want to see her. I know, I'm going to do everything possible to prevent it. David stirred in the hospital bed, having overheard the conversation. Richard, call Stern immediately. If there's been a judicial reassignment, we need to challenge it tonight. Richard was already dialing. Michael, we have a situation. Catherine's managed to get Judge Harris assigned to our case and obtained an emergency visitation order for tomorrow. Yes, that Judge Harris. I need options, and I need them now. As Richard spoke with Stern, outlining the latest development, Emma wheeled herself to the window overlooking the city lights. Snow had begun falling again, large flakes swirling past the glass. She pressed her small palm against the cold surface, her reflection overlapping with the distant glow of Manhattan. In that moment, Emma made a decision. If Catherine was coming for her, she wouldn't face her stepmother with fear anymore. Sarah Montgomery's daughter would be brave, just as her mother had been during those final moments on the sinking ship. Across town in her penthouse, Catherine reclined in a leather chair, sipping champagne as she listened to Elizabeth read the private investigator's report on Judge Collins. Her son has significant gambling debts, Elizabeth noted with satisfaction. That's why she was so willing to recuse herself when approached by our mutual friend at the State Bar Association. Catherine smiled coldly. And Judge Harris? Completely in our pocket, Elizabeth confirmed. The offshore account has been funded as agreed. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, you'll have 1 hour alone with Emma under the guise of supervised visitation. The court-appointed supervisor is Amanda's former law school classmate. Perfect, Catherine murmured, swirling the golden liquid in her glass. 1 hour is more than enough time. Michael paced nervously near the window. This is getting out of hand. Document fraud is one thing, but bribery of judges, hiring ex-cops to break into the Montgomery estate. If this gets out, we're looking at serious prison time. Catherine regarded him with contempt. No one asked for your opinion, Michael. You were happy enough to participate when you thought you'd be spending Montgomery money. That was before people started getting shot, Michael snapped, his usual smug demeanor cracking under pressure. My associate suffered an unfortunate accident during a routine burglary, Catherine replied dismissively. Nothing connects him to us. As for the judicial matters, Such things are impossible to prove without a paper trail, which doesn't exist. Elizabeth checked her watch. We should finalize the details for tomorrow. Once you have Emma alone, the intercom buzzed, interrupting their conversation. Catherine pressed the answer button irritably. I left instructions not to be disturbed. The doorman's voice came through clearly. Sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Montgomery, but Detective Maria Gonzalez from NYPD is here with officers. They have a warrant to speak with you immediately. The champagne glass slipped from Catherine's fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Elizabeth's face drained of color as she looked toward the balcony, calculating the distance to the adjacent building. Michael sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. It's over, he whispered. It's all over. Catherine recovered quickly, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her expression into one of innocent confusion. Send them up, she instructed the doorman. Then to Elizabeth and Michael, say nothing without our attorneys present. This is merely a routine inquiry. They have no evidence connecting us to Stevens. The doorbell rang with ominous finality. Catherine moved to answer it, preparing for the performance of her lifetime. Behind her, Elizabeth frantically sent a text message to Amanda. Police at Penthouse with warrant, destroy everything. Detective Gonzalez stood in the hallway, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. Her expression revealed nothing as she presented the warrant. Catherine Blackwood Montgomery, we have some questions regarding Paul Stevens, who was apprehended breaking into Montgomery Manor this afternoon. Catherine widened her eyes in practiced shock. How terrible. Is everyone all right? My stepdaughter. May we come in? Detective Gonzalez interrupted, already stepping forward without waiting for permission. Inside the penthouse, the detective's experienced gaze cataloged details. The shattered champagne glass, Elizabeth's pale complexion, Michael's obvious terror. Most tellingly, a laptop left open on the coffee table displayed an email with the subject line, Reapy Judge Harris confirmation. Interesting reading material, Detective Gonzalez observed, nodding toward the laptop. Catherine moved to close it, but an officer was faster, securing the device as potential evidence. This is private property, Catherine protested. You have no right. Actually, the warrant covers all electronic devices and documents related to the Montgomery case, the detective corrected her. Your phone as well, please. Catherine's mask of innocence slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. I want my attorney present before answering any questions. That's your right, Detective Gonzalez agreed. But I should inform you that Paul Stevens is currently negotiating a plea deal. He seems quite interested in reducing his potential 20-year sentence by revealing who hired him. Elizabeth made a small, involuntary sound of distress. Michael stood abruptly, his face shining with nervous perspiration. I need to use the bathroom, he announced. Sir, please remain where you are, an officer instructed firmly. Catherine's eyes darted between the detective and her increasingly unstable brother-in-law. She could practically see Michael's resolve crumbling, his loyalty evaporating under pressure. Michael, she said sharply, remember our discussion about remaining silent. Detective Gonzalez raised an eyebrow. Mr. Palmer, if you have information pertinent to this investigation, cooperating now would be viewed favorably by the district attorney's office. Michael looked at Catherine, then at Elizabeth, his expression transforming from fear to resentment. Years of being the laughingstock of the family, the useful idiot married to Elizabeth primarily for his family connections, crystallized into a moment of rebellion. I want immunity, he said suddenly. Full immunity in writing. And then I'll tell you everything about Catherine's plan to secure the Montgomery fortune and eliminate Emma as an obstacle. Michael, Elizabeth gasped. Catherine's face hardened into a mask of hatred. You spineless coward. Detective Gonzalez nodded to one of her officers. Take Mr. Palmer to the station and contact the DA about a potential immunity agreement. To Catherine and Elizabeth, she added, Catherine and Elizabeth Blackwood, you're both under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and solicitation of breaking and entering. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda warnings continued, Catherine stood rigidly, her mind racing through contingency plans. This was a setback, certainly, but not the end. She still had resources, connections, leverage that the police knew nothing about. Even as handcuffs closed around her wrists, Catherine's eyes gleamed with undiminished determination. She had clawed her way up from nothing once before. She would do it again, and Richard Montgomery would pay dearly for humiliating her. Her opportunity would come tomorrow at 3 o'clock, when Emma Montgomery would be delivered into her hands by court order. Detective Gonzalez might have Catherine in custody tonight, but bail would be arranged by morning. Judge Harris's visitation order would stand unless specifically revoked, and Catherine had plans for that one precious hour with her stepdaughter, plans that would change everything. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the snow-covered cityscape in pale gold. At the Montgomery penthouse, Richard stood at the window, watching the city awaken while turning an antique silver pocket watch over in his hands. The timepiece had been a wedding gift from Sarah, engraved with their initials and the promise, "Forever yours." It had stopped ticking the day she drowned, saving Emma. Richard hadn't worn it since. Behind him, Michael Stern arrived with a portfolio tucked under his arm, his face grave but determined. Rebecca showed him in, then quietly prepared coffee in the adjacent kitchen. Catherine and Elizabeth posted bail an hour ago, Stern announced without preamble. $3 million each. Richard nodded, unsurprised. And the visitation order? Still stands. Judge Harris refuses to recuse himself despite the clear conflict of interest. He claims there's insufficient evidence connecting him to the Blackwood sisters. Stern placed his portfolio on the glass coffee table. But we have a countermove. Judge Collins may have been forced to step aside, but she's filed a formal ethics complaint with the Judicial Review Board. Will that stop today's visitation? Stern's expression tightened. Not in time, no. The review board doesn't convene until tomorrow morning. Richard's hand closed around the pocket watch, knuckles whitening. I won't allow Emma to be alone with that woman. Not for a minute, let alone an hour. If you violate the court order, Harris could rule against you in the custody hearing, Stern warned. Catherine's team is counting on you to make that mistake. What choice do I have? You've seen what she's capable of. Richard gestured toward the hallway where Emma still slept, exhausted from the previous day's trauma. My daughter is terrified of her stepmother, and with good reason. Stern considered for a moment. There might be another way. The visitation order specifies Catherine's time with Emma must be supervised. By her law school friend, Richard countered bitterly. True, but it doesn't prohibit additional supervision or specify the location. Stern's eyes gleamed with the first hint of hope. If we hold the visitation in a public space with multiple witnesses and recording devices, the children's play area at Memorial Hospital, Richard suggested, the plan forming rapidly. David is still there recovering. The entire floor has security cameras. We could arrange for Dr. Lewis to be present as Emma's therapist. And I'll file an emergency motion this morning for additional protective measures, Stern added. At minimum, we can ensure Catherine can't remove Emma from the designated area. Rebecca entered with coffee cups, having overheard their conversation. I've already contacted hospital administration. They're willing to accommodate us, especially after I explain the circumstances. Richard glanced at his watch. 9 hours until the scheduled visitation. 9 hours to transform a potential nightmare into a controlled situation. Make the arrangements and get Detective Gonzalez on the phone. I want officers present, even if they have to stand outside the room. A small sound from the hallway drew their attention. Emma sat in her wheelchair, still in her nightgown, her golden hair tousled from sleep. How long she had been listening, Richard couldn't tell, but the determination in her blue eyes spoke volumes. I heard you talking about Catherine, she said, wheeling herself into the room. I have to see her today, don't I? Richard crossed to his daughter, kneeling to meet her eyes. Yes, but only for a little while, and in a safe place with lots of people around. I promise you won't be alone with her. Emma nodded, her small chin lifting slightly. I'm not afraid anymore, Dad. The certainty in her voice gave Richard pause. Emma? Mom wasn't afraid when she saved me, Emma explained with the simple clarity of a child who had contemplated mortality too young. She was brave. I want to be brave too. Richard felt his throat tighten. In that moment, Sarah's spirit shone so clearly in their daughter's eyes that it stole his breath. You already are, sweetheart. Braver than anyone I know. Across town in Elizabeth's penthouse, Catherine stood before a full-length mirror, carefully applying concealer to cover the dark circles beneath her eyes. Her night in a holding cell had left her appearance less than perfect. An indignity she would add to Richard Montgomery's growing tab of offenses against her. Elizabeth entered the bedroom, her movements jittery, nerves frayed by recent developments. Michael hasn't come home. His lawyer isn't answering my calls. Because he's busy negotiating Michael's betrayal, Catherine replied coldly, blending foundation with practiced precision. Stop worrying about your spineless husband and focus on what matters. Is everything arranged for today? Elizabeth nodded reluctantly. Judge Harris confirmed the visitation will proceed at 3 o'clock. Amanda called to say Montgomery's team is attempting to change the venue to Memorial Hospital, but Harris seems inclined to deny their request. Perfect. Catherine selected a modest navy dress from the closet, the picture of maternal concern rather than her usual more striking attire. And our contingency plan? Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. Catherine, after last night, perhaps we should reconsider. The police are watching us closely now. Catherine turned, eyes flashing with dangerous intensity. We've come too far to hesitate. Richard Montgomery humiliated me, had me arrested, turned my own sister against me. He will pay for that, and the girl is the key. But, but nothing, Catherine snapped. The modifications to her wheelchair are undetectable. A tragic accident during an emotional reunion with her beloved stepmother. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be on a plane to a country without extradition. Elizabeth paled. You're talking about permanently harming a child. Catherine's expression softened into something more calculated. Don't go soft on me now, Lizzie. Remember where we came from, the filthy apartment, mother's drunken boyfriends, the constant hunger. Remember the promises we made to each other. We would never be poor or powerless again, no matter what it took. I remember, Elizabeth whispered, the childhood memory washing over her like a cold wave. But this feels different. It isn't. Catherine turned back to the mirror, applying lipstick with steady hands. The world is divided into predators and prey. I refuse to be prey ever again. At Manhattan Memorial Hospital, David Montgomery sat upright in his bed while a nurse changed the dressing on his shoulder wound. The bullet had torn through muscle but missed bone and major blood vessels. Painful but not debilitating. When the nurse finished, David immediately reached for his phone to check for updates from Richard. A text appeared. Meeting with hospital security at 1 p.m. Visitation scheduled for 3 p.m. in the pediatric playroom, 4th floor. David replied quickly, I'll be there. The nurse frowned. Montgomery, you shouldn't be moving around yet. Doctor's orders. My niece needs me, David replied simply, as if that settled the matter entirely. By noon, Richard and Stern had secured the hospital venue despite Judge Harris's initial reluctance. The judge had finally conceded when Stern threatened to call an emergency press conference, highlighting Harris's suspicious ruling and potential conflicts of interest. Emma sat quietly in Dr. Lewis's temporary office at the hospital, working with colored clay as the child psychologist observed her. Can you show me how you're feeling about seeing Catherine today? Dr. Lewis asked gently. Emma molded the clay deliberately, creating a small figure seated in a wheelchair. Next to it, she shaped a taller figure. This is me, she explained, pointing to the wheelchair. And this is Dan and then standing next to me. She took a red piece of clay and formed a thin barrier around both figures. And this is protection. Dr. Lewis nodded encouragingly. That's very good, Emma. It shows you feel safe with your father. Is there anything else you want to add? Emma considered for a moment, then took a small piece of blue clay and placed it above the figures like a star. That's Mom, she said softly, watching over us. Richard observed from the doorway, his heart simultaneously breaking and swelling with pride. Dr. Lewis noticed him and signaled that she would join him outside. How is she? Richard asked when they were in the hallway. Remarkably composed for a child who's experienced such trauma, Dr. Lewis replied. Emma has developed impressive psychological resilience, but she still needs consistent support and stability. Will seeing Catherine today set back her progress? Dr. Lewis considered carefully. It's a calculated risk, but sometimes confronting a source of fear in a controlled environment can be empowering, especially with proper support. Richard nodded, glancing at his watch. 2 hours until the visitation. I need to check on the security arrangements. Will you stay with her? Of course. Detective Gonzalez met Richard in the hospital lobby, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. At 45, Maria Gonzalez carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had risen through the ranks through competence rather than connections. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her attire professional, but allowing freedom of movement. "We've completed background checks on all hospital staff assigned to the fourth floor today," she reported. "The pediatric playroom has 4 surveillance cameras with direct feeds to security. Officers Williams and Chen will be stationed outside, and I'll be inside the room as an observer." "Thank you," Richard said sincerely. "What's the status of your investigation into Catherine and Elizabeth?" "Ongoing. Michael Palmer continues to cooperate, providing details about the financial arrangements with Judge Harris. We've frozen several offshore accounts, but the evidence trail is complex." Detective Gonzalez lowered her voice. "Mr. Montgomery, I should warn you that while Mrs. Montgomery is under investigation, she hasn't been formally charged with anything related to Emma's abuse, the visitation proceeding legally." "I understand," Richard replied grimly. "We just need to get through today. The custody hearing is tomorrow, and with the evidence we've gathered, Catherine doesn't stand a chance." "Never underestimate a cornered predator," Gonzalez cautioned. "We'll be vigilant." At precisely 2:45, Catherine arrived at the hospital, escorted by Amanda Collins and the court-appointed supervisor, Judith Taylor. Catherine had dressed carefully for the occasion in a modest blue dress with a single strand of pearls. Her makeup subtle, hair styled simply. She looked every inch the concerned stepmother, anxious to reconnect with her beloved child. Security directed them to the fourth-floor pediatric wing. The playroom was bright and cheerful, decorated with murals of forests and animals. Toys were arranged on low shelves, and a small table with art supplies stood in the center. 2 hospital security guards checked their identification and bags before allowing them entry. Richard stood when they entered, his face a careful mask of civility. Lewis sat beside Emma, who remained in her wheelchair near the art table, her expression remarkably composed for a 6-year-old. Catherine immediately adopted an expression of emotional distress, her eyes glistening with perfectly timed tears. "Emma, sweetheart, I've missed you so much." She moved forward, arms outstretched as if for an embrace. Emma's hands tightened on her wheelchair armrests, but she didn't flinch or retreat. "Mrs. Montgomery," Dr. Lewis interjected smoothly, "please remember that Emma needs space. Perhaps you could sit at the table instead." Catherine's smile faltered for an instant before she recovered. "Of course, whatever makes Emma comfortable." Richard caught Detective Gonzalez's eye across the room, noting her watchful attention to Catherine's every movement. Judith Taylor, the court supervisor, seemed oblivious to the underlying tension, smiling blandly as she took notes on a clipboard. "Mr. Montgomery," Amanda Collins addressed Richard formally, "perhaps we could step outside and allow Mrs. Montgomery some time with Emma. The court order specifies." "I'm staying," Richard stated flatly. "The order specifies supervision, not privacy." Catherine seated herself at the small table across from Emma, arranging her features into an expression of maternal concern. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? I've been so worried." Emma met her stepmother's gaze directly. "I'm better now that I'm with Dad." A flash of irritation crossed Catherine's face before she masked it. "Of course you are. But you know I've always cared for you too. There have been some misunderstandings." "You hurt me," Emma said simply. The room fell silent at her direct statement. "You pushed my wheelchair down the stairs. You poured hot soup on me." Catherine's smile tightened. "Darling, you're confused. Those were accidents. I would never hurt you intentionally." "We have it on video," Emma replied, her small voice unwavering. Catherine's composure slipped further, a hardness entering her eyes despite her maintained smile. "Videos can be misleading, especially when manipulated by people who want to keep us apart." Dr. Lewis intervened. "Emma, would you like to show Mrs. Montgomery the drawing you made earlier?" Emma nodded, reaching for a sheet of paper on the table. The drawing showed a house with light streaming from the windows and a family of 3 outside. A man, a girl in a wheelchair, and a woman with a halo-like circle above her head. "This is my family," Emma explained. "Vandunalad, me, and Mom watching over us from heaven." Catherine's hand closed into a fist beneath the table. "That's lovely, dear. But remember, I'm your mother now." "No," Emma said with startling firmness. "You're the woman who married my dad. My mother is Sarah Montgomery, and she loved me enough to save my life. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Catherine's mask slipped further, revealing a glimpse of the cold calculation beneath. Such imagination, Catherine said tightly. Emma, would you like to see what I brought you? It's a special present. She reached into her handbag, but Detective Gonzalez stepped forward. Mrs. Montgomery, any items must be inspected first. Catherine's smile became brittle. Of course. She withdrew a small velvet box and handed it to Gonzalez, who carefully examined it before passing it to Emma. Inside was a silver charm bracelet. Emma studied it without touching. It's beautiful, Emma had acknowledged politely. Let me put it on you, Catherine suggested, reaching across the table. Emma withdrew her hands, placing them in her lap. No, thank you. Catherine's expression flickered between frustration and manufactured hurt. Don't you like it, sweetheart? I picked each charm specially for you. Emma doesn't have to accept gifts if she doesn't want to, Dr. Lewis reminded them gently. Catherine ignored the psychologist, focusing intently on Emma. I thought we could take a little walk together, just the two of us. The hospital has such lovely gardens, even in winter. That's not permitted by the visitation order, Richard interjected immediately. Actually, Amanda Collins countered, the order doesn't specifically prohibit movement within the hospital grounds as long as supervision continues. Richard was about to object when Emma spoke. I'll go. All eyes turned to the little girl in surprise. Emma, you don't have to, Richard began. I want to, Emma insisted, her blue eyes meeting her father's with unexpected certainty. Just to the garden outside this window where I can still see you. Richard hesitated, studying his daughter's face. Something in her expression, a quiet determination so like her mother's, made him pause. 10 minutes, he conceded reluctantly, and Detective Gonzalez goes with you. Catherine's smile tightened further. That hardly seems necessary. It's non-negotiable, Richard stated. After a brief consultation, the arrangement was approved. Catherine, Emma, Detective Gonzalez, and Judith Taylor would visit the small enclosed garden directly outside the playroom windows, visible from inside. Dr. Lewis would remain with Richard, observing through the glass. As Emma wheeled herself toward the door, Catherine moved to take control of the wheelchair. I can manage myself, Emma said quietly but firmly. Catherine withdrew her hands, the perfect smile still in place though her eyes had grown colder. The small party proceeded to the elevator, Detective Gonzalez positioning herself directly behind Emma's wheelchair. When they reached the garden, a light snow had begun to fall. The enclosed courtyard was small but well-maintained, with stone benches and winter-hardy plants. Catherine guided them to a bench partially visible from the window above. Isn't this nice? She said brightly, brushing snow from the seat. Just the two of us, almost like before. We were never really alone before, Emma observed. You only pretended to care about me when Dad was watching. Catherine's smile vanished entirely, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You ungrateful little cripple. After everything I've done, Mrs. Montgomery, Detective Gonzalez warned sharply. Remember where you are. Catherine composed herself with visible effort. Emma, sweetheart, I don't know what your father has been telling you, but I've only ever wanted what's best for you. Emma's small hands gripped her wheelchair rims, her expression remarkably steady. You wanted Dad's money. You never wanted me. That's not true, Catherine insisted, though her eyes had grown calculating. She glanced toward the court supervisor, who had stepped away to take a phone call, then back at Detective Gonzalez. Could we have just a moment of privacy? This is difficult emotional territory for a child. I'm staying right here, Gonzalez replied firmly. Catherine's frustration mounted visibly. She checked her watch, then the surrounding garden, as if looking for something or someone. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming softer, almost genuinely emotional. Emma, I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But everyone deserves a second chance, don't they? Your father had one after neglecting you for so long. Emma studied her stepmother's face carefully. Dad made mistakes because he was sad about Mom dying. You hurt me on purpose because you were jealous. The directness of the child's assessment seemed to catch Catherine off guard. Her carefully constructed facade cracked further. You think you're so clever, she hissed, leaning closer, just like your mother. Do you know what happened to her? She drowned, saving a crippled child who wasn't worth the sacrifice. Emma didn't flinch. My mother was brave and kind. She loved me enough to die for me. Nobody will ever love you like that. Catherine's face contorted with naked rage. Her hand shot out, gripping Emma's wheelchair armrest with white-knuckled intensity. You little... That's enough, Detective Gonzalez intervened, stepping between them. This visitation is over. From the window above, Richard had been watching the interaction with increasing concern. The moment Catherine grabbed Emma's wheelchair, he was moving, racing toward the elevator with Dr. Lewis close behind. Catherine stood, smoothing her dress with practiced poise. I was merely adjusting her chair. Emma tends to position herself too close to edges. We're going back inside, Gonzalez stated firmly, leaving no room for argument. Catherine nodded pleasantly, though her eyes burned with thwarted fury. As Gonzalez turned to speak with the court supervisor, Catherine leaned down swiftly, her lips nearly touching Emma's ear. This isn't over, she whispered. Accidents happen to little girls in wheelchairs all the time. Emma looked directly into the hate-filled eyes so close to hers. I'm not afraid of you anymore. As they returned to the elevator, Catherine positioned herself behind Emma's wheelchair, one hand reaching discreetly toward the control panel beneath the armrest, where Paul Stevens had placed the sabotage device the previous day. Emma sensed the movement and called out clearly, Detective Gonzalez, please push my wheelchair. It feels wobbly. Gonzalez immediately took control of the chair, moving Catherine aside with professional efficiency. Catherine's hand withdrew, her smile now a brittle mask, barely concealing rage. When they returned to the playroom, Richard was waiting, his face tight with concern. The moment Emma wheeled through the doorway, he knelt beside her chair, eyes searching her face. Are you okay? Emma nodded. I'm fine, Dad. Can we go home now? Yes, sweetheart. Right away. As Richard gathered Emma's things, Catherine approached Amanda Collins, whispering urgently. The attorney nodded, then cleared her throat. Mr. Montgomery, we'll be seeing you at tomorrow's custody hearing. My client expects full residential custody, given the clear evidence of your neglect and Emma's need for maternal guidance. Richard didn't bother to respond directly. To Stern, he said, We're leaving. Please handle the formalities. As they moved toward the door, Catherine called out in a voice loud enough for all to hear. Emma, darling, remember what I said. Accidents happen so quickly. Do be careful. Detective Gonzalez turned sharply at the thinly veiled threat. Mrs. Montgomery, I strongly advise you to refrain from making statements that could be construed as threatening. Catherine smiled innocently. I'm simply concerned for my stepdaughter's welfare. These hospital floors can be so slippery. Outside in the corridor, Richard knelt before Emma once they were alone. What happened in the garden? Did she threaten you? Emma nodded solemnly. She said accidents happen to girls in wheelchairs, and she tried to touch something under my armrest. Richard's blood ran cold. He immediately examined the wheelchair, finding a small electronic device hidden beneath the control panel. Detective Gonzalez joined them, her expression darkening as Richard showed her the discovery. This appears to be a remote override. It would allow someone to take control of the chair's movement from a distance. She carefully removed the device using a handkerchief to preserve fingerprints. This is attempted assault at minimum, possibly attempted murder. Will it be enough to arrest her? Richard asked urgently. We'll need to confirm it matches components found in Stephen's possession and verify the fingerprints, Gonzalez replied. But yes, this is the evidence we needed. Emma looked up at her father, her expression serious beyond her years. I knew she would try something. That's why I agreed to go to the garden. Richard stared at his daughter in astonishment. You deliberately put yourself at risk? I knew you were watching, Emma explained with simple logic. And Detective Gonzalez was with me. Mom would have been brave like that. Richard gathered Emma into his arms, holding her close as emotion overwhelmed him. You are so much like her, he whispered. So brave. But please never risk yourself like that again. I couldn't bear to lose you too. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and spectators drawn by the sensational developments in the Montgomery case. Inside the main courtroom, Richard sat beside Stern, his expression calm but determined. Emma was not present, having remained at the hospital with David and Dr. Lewis. Judge Margaret Collins had been reinstated following the ethics investigation into Judge Harris, who now faced a judicial review board and potential criminal charges for accepting bribes. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Collins entered and took her seat. "Before we begin today's custody hearing," she announced, "I must address certain developments that have come to my attention. Mrs. Catherine Montgomery was arrested last night on charges of attempted assault, conspiracy, and witness tampering. Her sister, Elizabeth Blackwood, has also been taken into custody as an accessory." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Amanda Collins stood alone at the defense table, her usual confidence noticeably diminished. "Your Honor," she began, "in light of these developments, I must request a continuance to confer with my client and restructure our case." Judge Collins regarded the attorney coolly. "Request denied, counselor. These proceedings have been delayed enough. Furthermore, I understand you yourself are under investigation by the Bar Association for potential ethics violations connected to this case." Amanda paled visibly but remained standing. "In that case, Your Honor, I must regretfully withdraw as counsel." "Noted," Judge Collins replied briskly. "Does Mrs. Montgomery have alternate representation present?" No one responded. In the absence of representation for the respondent, and given the overwhelming evidence presented in previous hearings, including documented abuse and yesterday's attempted assault, this court finds in favor of the petitioner, Richard Montgomery. Sole legal and physical custody of Emma Montgomery is hereby granted to her father. The gavel struck with finality. Richard closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him like a physical wave. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward as Richard emerged with stern. "Mr. Montgomery, how do you feel about the custody decision? What will happen to Catherine now? Is it true she tried to sabotage Emma's wheelchair?" Richard raised a hand, quieting the barrage of questions. "My daughter has been through enough. Our family needs privacy to heal. All I can say is that justice has been served, and Emma is safe now. That's all that matters." As winter gave way to early spring, Montgomery Manor underwent transformation. The formal dining room where Emma had once endured humiliation became a bright art studio with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Her bedroom was repainted in cheerful yellows and blues, the furniture rearranged to maximize accessibility. Most importantly, the house filled with laughter again. Richard adjusted his schedule permanently, returning home each day by 5 to share dinner with Emma. They developed new rituals: Sunday morning pancakes, his still comically misshapen; afternoon chess games; bedtime stories that often ended with both of them falling asleep mid-chapter. Emma continued weekly sessions with Dr. Lewis, gradually processing her trauma and rebuilding her sense of security. Her artwork evolved, the dark confined spaces giving way to open skies and horizons. In March, her school hosted an art exhibition where Emma's painting of a lighthouse on a stormy sea earned particular praise. "The contrast is remarkable," Rachel Turner explained to Richard as they stood before the canvas. "See how the darkness surrounds everything, yet the light from the lighthouse cuts through it all, creating a path to safety." Richard studied the painting with new understanding. Where did she learn to paint like this? Rachel smiled. "Emma has always had this talent. She just needed to feel safe enough to express it." On a bright April morning, Richard knocked gently on Emma's bedroom door. "Ready for our outing, Captain?" Emma wheeled herself into the hallway, wearing a new spring dress and a captain's hat they had purchased together at the Maritime Museum. "Ready, first mate." They drove to the harbor where a small, specially adapted sailboat waited. David stood on the dock, his arm fully healed, adjusting the rigging. "Are you sure about this?" Richard asked Emma quietly. "We don't have to go on the water if it brings back bad memories." Emma shook her head firmly. "Mom loved sailing. She wouldn't want me to be afraid of it forever." With careful coordination, they settled Emma aboard, securing her wheelchair to the special mount David had designed. Richard took the tiller while David managed the sails. Emma's face glowed with excitement as the boat glided away from the dock, picking up speed as it entered open water. The sun sparkled across the harbor, the spring breeze filling their sail. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the wind in her hair, her face tilted toward the warmth. "She feels it too," David said quietly to Richard. "Sarah's presence. She's always been with them, especially out here." Richard nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He reached into his pocket, retrieving the silver pocket watch that had stopped the day Sarah died. With Emma's laughter ringing across the water, Richard opened the case, listening. Tick, tick, tick. The watch had started again, keeping perfect time. That evening, Richard tucked Emma into bed, her eyes already heavy with contented exhaustion from their sailing adventure. "Dad," she murmured sleepily, "today was the best day." "It was," he agreed, smoothing her golden hair. "Can we go sailing again next weekend?" "Absolutely." Emma smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "I think Mom would be happy now. She doesn't have to worry about us anymore." Richard gently kissed her forehead. "Sleep well, my brave girl." He moved to the doorway, turning to look back at his daughter. The nightlight cast a soft glow around her bed, keeping the darkness at bay. Outside her window, stars had begun to appear in the deepening twilight, like beacons guiding travelers home. Richard thought of Sarah, of the sacrifice she had made to save their daughter, and of the journey that had brought him back to what mattered most. He thought of lighthouses standing strong against storms, their light cutting through the darkest night to guide ships safely to harbor. "We found our way home, Sarah," he whispered. "We found our way." In her sleep, Emma smiled,